happy, as always, that you made it here tonight. I have a fun little story set aside for the both of us. I have been eager to read it for some time now, and I think tonight will be a good night for it. At any rate, I'm very excited to be with you and lead you off to sleep tonight. Such is always a fun privilege, and I promise you that I'll be joining you very, very soon. I can feel the fatigue, even after having not done too much today. Perhaps thought about doing much, but wound up doing quite little. Tonight we're going to be reading the story of King Lear, as told by Tina Packer in her collection of retellings of Shakespeare's works called Tales from Shakespeare. I have never read King Lear before and was just flipping through some of Tina's retellings. I know one joke about King Lear, which maybe I'll say at the end. And I read like a little bit of Shakespeare's play, at least the opening scene. Beyond that, I'm going into this blind, beyond learning how to pronounce some of the names of the daughters, and Gloucester, which we'll get to. Well, I don't want to make you fall asleep before we start the recording, so why don't I kick it off with the usual introduction that Tina Packer does. Once more, this is King Lear by Tina Packer. A king gives up a throne. Daughters flatter and deceive a father. The father disowns a beloved daughter. Wife plots against husband. Brother turns against brother. Sisters pursue jealousy to the death. King Lear explores a chilling family truth. The deepest wounds can be inflicted by the dearest hands. And with that, we begin. King Lear unrolled a map of his empire and ran a gnarled finger along its newest markings. He had spent decades keeping peace in the land. Now the king was old and tired. He had decided to divide his kingdom amongst his 3 daughters, Goneril, Regan, and Cordelia. He would leave governing to them and remain king in title only. Lear intended to give his eldest daughter, Goneril, and his middle daughter, Regan, each a part of his kingdom equal in size and riches. The third portion he now lingered over. It was larger, lovelier, and more fertile than the other 2. Lear had carved it out for his favorite daughter, Cordelia. She was the youngest, but the wisest and most good-natured of all 3 women, and so would make the best ruler. Cordelia was today to be betrothed to either the Duke of Burgundy or the King of France. This meant she would live much of the time across the sea, ruling from afar. Lear couldn't bear to be parted from Cordelia. He planned to live out his days with her. It was best to divide the kingdom now. To make the divisions appear equitable, the king proposed a test of his daughter's devotion. He called together his royal court, Cordelia's suitors, and summoned his 3 daughters. King Lear announced that he would divide his land according to how well his children publicly proclaimed their love for him. Lear was confident that sweet, loyal Cordelia's answer would prove the best. "Which of you, shall we say, doth love us the most?" the king asked. Goneril spoke first, her hands clasped to her heart. "Sir, I love you more than word can wield the matter," she cried, "dearer than eyesight, space, and liberty, no less than life." Regan stepped in front of her older sister. "She comes too short. I profess myself an enemy to all other joys," she declared. Lear turned eagerly to Cordelia. "What can you say to draw a third more opulent than your sisters?" Cordelia was silent. She loved her father dearly, but thought his test was wrong. She could not join her sisters in their self-serving flattery. She struggled over her answer. "Nothing, my lord," she said at last. The old king felt the blood rise in his wrinkled face. "Nothing will come of nothing. Speak again." "Good my lord, you have begot me, bred me, loved me. I return these duties back as are right fit. I obey you, love you, and most honor you." Cordelia looked at Goneril and Regan, who stood with their husbands, the Duke of Albany and Cornwall. "Why have my sisters taken husbands if they say they love you all?" Cordelia's answer was truthful, but painful and humiliating. Lear was a man accustomed to hearing what he wished to hear. "Truth be thy dowry," the king thundered. Then Lear drew his dagger, slashed his map, and sliced Cordelia's portion in two. One half he added to Goneril's land, the other half to Regan's inheritance. Then the king coldly turned to Cordelia. "As a stranger to my heart, I hold thee forever," he said. "Better thou hadst not been born than not to have pleased me better." Cordelia's eyes filled with tears, but she held her head high. The Earl of Kent, Lear's most faithful adviser, could remain silent no longer. He knew it was his duty to protect the king, even from himself. "Thy youngest daughter does not love thee least," the loyal earl objected. "Revoke thy gift. I'll tell thee thou dost evil." Kent's words heaped fuel on Lear's fiery anger. "Out of my sight," he railed, and banished the earl from the kingdom on pain of death. Lear then called forth two suitors who had been wooing Cordelia, and asked if either would marry her without a dowry. Duke of Burgundy dropped his suit at once, but the King of France was impressed by Cordelia's honesty, and said he loved her more than ever and would make her his queen. "Take her," King Lear shouted, and swept out of the throne room. As the rest of the royal party followed Lear, the Earl of Gloucester stood stunned by the king's rashness. The earl was one of the highest nobles in the land. He had never seen his king behave like this. It disturbed him. Gloucester also thought about his own two sons, Edgar, by his wife, and Edmund, slightly younger, by his mistress. Gloucester was confident that nothing would ever drive a wedge between him and either of his sons, or could any man's children turn against him? Unbeknownst to the earl, Edmund was indeed, at that moment, scheming to get his father's land. He planned to turn his father against Edgar. With the elder son out of the way, Edmund, the younger son, would inherit Gloucester's title and property. Edmund strode into the throne room, reading a letter. When he was sure that his father had seen it, he hurriedly shoved the note into his doublet. Gloucester smiled. The letter must reveal some mischief. Was it a love letter? He laughingly asked Edmund to hand it over. "I beseech you, sir," Edmund replied. "It is a letter from my brother, and I have not all read, and for so much as I have, I find it not fit for you." Gloucester's smile disappeared. He demanded to see the message. Edmund sighed and handed over the letter, which he had forged to look like Edgar's handwriting. Gloucester's eyes widened. Here was evidence that Edgar, anxious to get his inheritance, was plotting against his own father's life. The old earl was devastated. He ordered Edmund to find out more about his older brother's intentions and report back to him. Edmund nodded. Everything had gone just as he planned. He sought out Edgar and, professing brotherly loyalty, warned him that their father was in a murderous rage against him for unknown reasons. Edmund urged Edgar to go into hiding. He promised he would intercede with their father on Edgar's behalf. Edgar was bewildered by this strange warning, but believed his brother and fled into the countryside. Within a week, King Lear had installed himself at Gonrill's castle. He brought with him 100 boisterous knights and a court fool. The king and his followers spent their days hunting and their nights feasting and merrymaking. They wore out the castle's servants and Gonrill's patience. "Our court shows like a riotous inn," Gonrill told her father. She instructed her servants to ignore the commands of the old king and his followers. Now that she owned one half of the kingdom, Gonrill swelled with her new power. She would rule as she saw fit. She ignored the fact that she and her sister had promised to care for their father into his old age. Lear was shocked by this ill treatment. "Ingratitude, more hideous in a child than in the sea monster," the king complained to his constant companion, the fool. The fool was not surprised in the least. "Thou hadst little wit in thy bald crown when thou gavest thy golden one away," he clucked. The fool always told the truth, but dressed it up as a joke. Lear allowed his fool to tease him because he was so certain of the fellow's loyalty, but Gonrill's servants were another matter. One evening, a humbly dressed stranger approached King Lear and asked permission to serve him. The man proved useful at once, taking the inattentive servants to task and even tripping an insolent steward. Lear did not recognize his new ally, the banished Earl of Kent, seeking to continue his loyal service in disguise. Gonrill was furious with Lear's new servant and ordered her father to send away 50 of his knights in response. King Lear trembled with rage. "How sharper than a servant's tooth it is to have a thankless child. When Regan shall hear this of thee, with her nails she'll flay thy wolfish visage." He sent Kent ahead with a letter to his middle daughter, telling of Gonrill's cruelty and saying he was coming to stay with her. Gonrill, too, sent a letter to Regan, telling her version of the story. Lear stormed out of Gonrill's castle. He was overcome by such intense emotion that he feared for his sanity. "Oh, let me not be mad, sweet heaven," the king cried to his fool. "Let me not be mad." Regan and her husband, the Duke of Cornwall, were already on their way to visit the Earl of Gloucester. Gloucester's castle stood midway between those of Lear's daughters. The Earl of Kent and Gonrill's steward, each bearing a letter, arrived at Gloucester's castle at the same time. When Kent saw the steward present Gonrill's treacherous letter to Regan, he lost his temper and attacked the servant. This in turn infuriated Cornwall, who promptly had Kent clapped into the stocks as punishment. Gloucester, lord of the castle, was too troubled by his own son Edgar's possible betrayal to intervene. "These late eclipses in the sun and moon portend no good to us," Gloucester said to himself. Now he anticipated more trouble. Shortly after, King Lear arrived at Gloucester's castle. He did not even finish his affectionate greeting to Regan before Gonrill arrived, too. The king's two older daughters united against him. "What should you need of more than 50 knights?" Regan asked him. "Yea, or so many. If you will come to me, I entreat you to bring but 25. To no more will I give place." Lear seethed with anger. "I'll go with thee," he said at last to Gonrill. "Thy 50 yet doth double 25, so thou art twice her love." Gonrill linked arms with Regan. "Why need you 25? 10 or 5? She taunted. "What need 1? Regan added. "You unnatural hags, I will have such revenges on you both." Lear sputtered. "O fool, I shall go mad." The king strode angrily out of the castle alone and headed toward the heath. A gathering storm rumbled in the distance. Alarmed for their king's safety, Kent and the fool followed. A spiteful smile spread across Regan's face. To willful men, the injuries that they themselves procure must be their schoolmasters. She turned to the Earl of Gloucester. "Shut up your doors." "The bleak winds do sorely ruffle," Gloucester objected. "By no means entreat the king to stay," Gonrill commanded. Outside the castle's stone walls, Lear defiantly faced the growing tempest. "Blow, winds, and crack your cheeks," he cried. "Rage blow, rumble thy bellyful, spite fire, spout rain. The tempest in my mind doth from my senses take all feeling." Lightning flashed and thunder cracked, as if in response. Having scouted the area, Kent fought his way back through the storm of the king. "Gracious my lord, hard by here is a hovel." Kent took Lear's arm and led him toward the small, rough hut. As they made their way across the desolate heath, Lear squinted into the storm. "Poor, naked wretches that bide the pelting of this pitiless storm. How shall your houseless heads and unfed sides defend you?" He had remembered all the riches he had enjoyed, while so many of his subjects lived in poverty. "Oh, I have taken too little care of this," the king realized. Inside the hovel, they discovered a wretched man dressed in nothing but a rough blanket. "What art thou?" Kent asked. Beneath the grime and matted hair was Gloucester's good son, Edgar. Thanks to Edmund's lies, Edgar could not flee Britain. Soldiers were in every port watching for him. It was much safer to dwell in the shadow of his father's castle. There, Edgar called himself Tom and pretended to be a lunatic beggar. "This is poor Tom," Edgar jabbered. "When the foul fiend rages, eats cow dung for salads, swallows the old rat in the ditch dog, drinks the green scum of the standing pool." He scratched violently at one ear. "Hello, hello, hello." Lear watched in amazement. He felt a similar wildness growing in his mind. Inside the castle, Gloucester prepared to brave the storm. "If I die for it, the king my old master must be rescued," he confided to his son Edmund. The old earl also said that he had received word that Cordelia and the French army had landed at Dover. They planned to rescue Lear and avenge all insults against him. Disobeying the orders of his royal visitors, Gloucester gathered supplies for the king. Edmund rushed to tell Gonrill and Regan and her husband, Cornwall, all that his father had reported. In gratitude for this treachery, Cornwall denounced Gloucester and gave Edmund his father's title and land. He then directed Edmund to accompany Gonerill back to her castle so she could warn her husband, Albany, about the coming French invasion. The revenges we are bound to take upon your traitorous father are not fit for your beholding, Cornwall told Edmund. Meanwhile, Gloucester, realizing the daughters wanted their father dead, made his way out of the castle. He headed out across the rain-swept heath in search of his king. He found Lear ranting with a filthy madman in the hovel. Lear pretended to be in a court of law. He made the fool and the madman Tom act the part of his daughters. Lear put them on trial for their inhuman behavior. Appalled at the state of his royal lord, Gloucester urged Kent and the fool to carry the now surely mad king toward Dover, where Cordelia's troops would help them. Then Gloucester secretly returned to his own castle. As soon as he reached the castle gate, 2 guards seized him. They hauled Gloucester before Regan and Cornwall and bound him to a chair. Regan denounced him as a traitor for helping her father and not reporting the arrival of the French army. Cornwall towered over the old earl. With malicious pleasure, he gouged out one of Gloucester's eyes. "Out, vile jelly," Cornwall sneered. "Where is thy luster now?" "One side will mock the other," Regan laughed cruelly. "The other, too." Cornwall's servants were shocked by this barbarity. One drew a sword and tried to stop his master. The servant mortally wounded Cornwall, but not before Regan ran him through with a sword. Cornwall hauled himself to his feet. With a great effort, he plucked out Gloucester's other eye. Gloucester screamed for his younger son. "Edmund, enkindle all the sparks of nature to revenge this horrid act." Regan leaned over Gloucester's bloody, unseeing face. "Thou call'st on him that hates thee," she spat. "It was Edmund that made the overture of thy treasons to us." She turned her back. "Go thrust him out at gates, and let him smell his way to Dover," she cried to her servants. As Regan knelt before her dying husband, an old servant untied Gloucester and led him out of the castle and onto the heath. In short time, they ran into the lunatic beggar Tom. Gloucester listened to his ravings, but did not recognize Tom as his son Edgar. Edgar was anguished to see his father's wounds. He cried out, but in gibberish, still playing the lunatic. The blind earl knew the old servant with him could not travel far, and he asked the crazy beggar to lead him instead to a high sea cliff in Dover. As they traveled, Gloucester bemoaned what fate had dealt him. "As flies to wanton boys are we to the gods," the old earl said. "They kill us for their sport." The blind man and the beggar neared the cliffs of Dover. Edgar, still undetected, saw that his father intended to leap to his death, so he instead brought Gloucester to a low hill and convinced him that the cliff lay below. "If Edgar live, oh, bless him," Gloucester cried. Then he hurled himself forward. The old man fainted before he hit the soft earth. Edgar gently roused his father, and putting on a different accent, swore that he had seen Gloucester fall from a great height. The old man was astounded that the gods had protected him. He vowed to never again try to take his own life. Suddenly, a figure burst upon father and son with weapon drawn. "Thou old unhappy traitor, the sword is out that must destroy thee," the intruder cried. Edgar drew his own blade and planted himself before the man. It was Goneril's steward. Regan, fearing that the blinded Earl would stir up sympathy against her, had offered a reward for killing Gloucester. The steward's greedy ambition far outstriped his talent. Before he landed even one hit, he was struck down by Edgar. "Bury my body, and give the letters which thou find'st about me to Edmund, Earl of Gloucester." The steward gasped, and with that he died. Edgar drew 2 scrolls from the steward's doublet. They were both addressed to his brother. The first letter was from Regan. Now widowed, she asked Edmund to marry her. The second note was from Goneril. She begged Edmund to kill her husband, Albany, so that she would be free to become Edmund's wife. Edgar pocketed the damning letters. Suddenly, another figure approached, this one ragged, unarmed, and crowned with weeds. He muttered incessantly. Gloucester turned an ear toward the man. "Is it not the king?" he asked. Lear studied the blind man without recognition and giggled. "No eyes in thy head. Get thee glass eyes, and like a scurvy politician, seem to see the things thou dost not," the mad king taunted. Shouts rang out in the distance. It was the men under Cordelia's command. Her army had encamped nearby. Before Edgar or Gloucester could stop him, King Lear sprinted away, hollering as if he were hunting a wild animal. The men at last caught up with Lear and gently ushered him to a bed in Cordelia's tent. There the king slept a peaceful, dreamless sleep, while war preparations were made on both sides. When Lear awoke, he found Cordelia by his side. "Pray you now, forget and forgive," he said to his daughter. "I am old and foolish." Cordelia embraced her father, grateful to see him in control of his fragile senses. Then Lear finally recognized the Earl of Kent. Blissfully happy to be reunited with his beloved daughter and his faithful nobleman, the old king fell back into a deep sleep. Not far away, Regan's troops had joined with Goneril's and Albany's. The 3 had arrived to meet with Edmund, who would command the combined forces. However, the sisters' minds were not on the upcoming war with the French, but on their ongoing battle with each other to win Edmund's love. As Regan and Goneril argued, Edgar, now clean and dressed as a soldier, sneaked into camp. Finding Albany alone, he asked the Duke for permission to challenge Edmund. As proof of Edmund's treachery, Edgar offered Albany the letter from Goneril, which plotted his own murder. Albany agreed to call for Edgar when the time was right. Edmund led the sisters' joint armies into battle. They soundly defeated Cordelia's French forces. Cordelia and Lear were taken prisoner. The Duke of Albany detested the way his wife, Goneril, and sister-in-law, Regan, had treated their father. Albany gave orders that Lear and Cordelia be pardoned, but Edmund had other plans which would put him in line for the throne of all Britain. He secretly sent for the prisoners. Lear and Cordelia were brought before Edmund. Cordelia was defiant. "We are not the first who with best meaning have incurred the worst," she told their captor. Lear draped his arm around his youngest daughter's shoulder. "Come, let's away to prison," the king said. "We 2 alone will sing like birds in a cage." Edmund sent father and daughter to their cell and handed his captain secret orders to kill them both. Meanwhile, Edgar returned to Gloucester, whom he had left outside the camp. The young man knelt and at last revealed his identity. The old man, weakened by his injuries and grief for Edmund's treachery, was overpowered by this new joy. His heart burst. The old earl died in his son's arms. Edgar sorrowfully released his father's body and went to the British camp to challenge his treacherous brother. Albany had already taken up that cause. The Duke called Edmund a traitor. Edmund smugly dared him to find one single person to back up the charge. "Thou art a traitor, false to thy gods, thy brother, and thy father," a voice called. Edgar marched into the camp as Regan, Goneril, Albany, and their armies looked on. Edmund drew his sword. "Back do I toss these treasons to thy head." The two brothers crossed swords. Suddenly, Regan collapsed. "Sick, oh, sick," she groaned. Goneril hid a smile as Regan was carried away. "If not, I'll ne'er trust poison," she muttered. Edgar and Edmund paid no attention. They fought on, steel clashing against steel. Finally, the elder brother dealt his younger brother a deadly blow. As Edmund collapsed, Goneril threw herself at his feet. Albany held Goneril's letter before her. "Read thine own evil," he snarled at his wife. Goneril fled to her tent. A moment later, a frightened servant entered with a bloody knife. Regan was dead of poison at Goneril's hand, the servant reported, and Goneril had stabbed herself. Faced with his own impending death, Edmund admitted to Albany that he had ordered the murder of Cordelia and Lear. The Duke dispatched a messenger with a counter-order at once. It was too late. Howl, 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 howl. King Lear stumbled into the camp. Cordelia's lifeless body lay draped in his arms. The heavens' vault should crack. The distraught king cried, "She's gone forever." Kent and Albany helped him lay Cordelia on the ground. Lear gently touched his daughter's pale lips and patted her hand. Then he raised his head. "A plague upon you, murderous traitors all," Lear shrieked. The old king was too grieved to live. He wrapped Cordelia's arms around him. "Why should a dog, a horse, a rat have life, and thou no breath at all?" he whispered. Then, in the cold embrace of the daughter who loved him best, King Lear embraced death himself. King Lear by Tina Packer, from Tales from Shakespeare. Oh my gosh, wow, that was absolutely amazing. I had such fun with this story. Oh my lord, this was amazing. I can't believe I hadn't delved into this sooner. It feels so much like Hamlet, where, well, first off, there's like a whole bunch of, people getting axed off at the end, and then the madness that King Lear plays here and that Hamlet plays in Hamlet. It's just so striking. And all the relations and the dual stories that play out here is similar to Hamlet, with the dual stories of Laertes and his haste and willpower, along with Fortinbras and his willpower, compared to Hamlet's lack of willpower. And then here we have the treachery between kin playing out. It's just absolutely wild. Man, this took a little bit to read, but I am not complaining in the slightest. Yeah, my voice is going to be shot after reading this one, and it's bloody well worth it. Hamlet has the amazing 1996 production from Kenneth Branagh, but no one has produced King Lear yet. Like, nothing crazy that I've seen. I think only Akira Kurosawa has a renowned version of King Lear, but that's a different type of adaptation, which is called radical translation, where something like Polanski's Macbeth is a traditional translation, I think. So it's very different than the source material. I would love to see a full-length production of this one. And now I am bloody stoked to read the play and maybe even see it one day, who knows. I have a collection of BBC productions of their entire run on Shakespeare for DVD. Back in the 70s and 80s. I think it was the 80s more so. Yeah. And I am excited to see who plays King Lear in that one. I was expecting a little more from Cordelia in this story, but I guess because she was banished, you're not going to see much of her. Wow. I can't compare it to the original, of course, so I don't know what was changed and all that jazz. But this felt so bloody faithful. Oh my gosh, it was absolutely wild. I hope my excitement is not keeping you up at all. And if anything, I'd be incredibly flattered if you were asleep by now. My high school French teacher, she said that as she went up in age, the story of King Lear appealed more and more to her, and that it grew on her. So I'm interested in seeing where it grows on me in the long run. Immediately, something I felt in the story was the theme of loyalty and the character pattern of being a caretaker, which is what I saw in Cordelia, her behavior, by siding with the truth. And then, who was Lear's, best servant? Not the fool, but I don't know. Oh, maybe the Earl of Kent? Yeah, the Earl of Kent. Yeah, I mean, what great caretakers for him. I love working around the elderly, so I can value those types of ideas. And the wickedness of Regan and Goneril is the antithesis of what I would value. But let's talk about Goneril. Oh my lord, what a nasty, you-know-what. She is terrible. I was not expecting such a, dare I say, cool villain for this story. I mean, it features all the motifs of Shakespeare that you would expect. It has disguises. I mean, I think the only thing it's missing, well, it has disguises, madness, kings, regicide, if you want to go that far. Like I was saying, I think the only thing it's missing is cross-dressing. But maybe I fulfilled that by reading as all the women. And I had a bloody fun time coming up with some of the voices. I know they were probably not like accurate or whatever, but it was a lot of bloody fun. Especially for Tom. Tom was wild. Oh man, I feel like I'm going to go as crazy as Tom by the end of this recording. Well, I mean, amazing. King Lear, absolutely phenomenal. I am stoked to get more hands-on with it. And as this is one of Shakespeare's best, as I can see now just from a translation of the original play, we will be reading it again by different authors. Maybe not soon enough, but in good time. And there are some really good quotes in the story. Nothing will come of nothing. Well, no sleep will come if I do not sleep. So, therefore, I must part. And even though it be such sweet sorrow, I shall say good night to you till it be morrow. Thank you for being here with me tonight. And I had a blast. I hope to see you soon. And if not, I don't mind. I'm just glad that we have this moment now to rest and feel safe and be free in a inner sort of way. And in our dreams, may we find solace and know that any discontent that may arise within them is just another part of ourselves, and that anything that's there is us, and it can be loved no matter what. Good night, and sweet dreams.